70%. That is the number of people who come into serious money and lose it within 5 years. Not 70% of broke people. 70% of people who actually had it. Lottery winners. Athletes. Early entrepreneurs who built something real and cashed out. Gone. All of it. Back to zero or worse. And here is the thing nobody talks about. The same pattern shows up with first-generation millionaires. People who grinded for years, built a business, hit 7 figures for the first time, a huge chunk of them do not keep it. Not because they were unlucky. Not because the market crashed on them specifically, because the skill set that gets you to $1 million is completely different from the skill set that keeps you there. And most people never make that switch. Today we are breaking down exactly why that happens, the specific traps that eat your first million alive, and the mental framework you need to actually hold on to what you built. Here is something nobody tells you when you hit that first big number. The traits that made you money are the exact same traits that will destroy it. Think about what it takes to build your first million. Aggressive risk tolerance, extreme confidence, a bias toward action over analysis, an ability to ignore the people who told you it was impossible and just move anyway. That is a phenomenal skill set for building. It is a terrible skill set for protecting. When you are in building mode, the upside is everything. You move fast, you bet on yourself, you push through uncertainty because the potential payoff justifies it. But wealth preservation runs on a completely different operating system. It is about asymmetric thinking. It is about asking not how much can I make, but how much can I afford to lose. It is about building systems that survive bad years, not just capitalize on good ones. The problem is that your brain does not automatically switch modes when your bank account hits 7 figures. You still think like a builder. You still feel the pull to chase the next play. Psychologists call this the success blind spot. When you have a track record of wins, you start to genuinely believe that the rules of risk do not apply to you the way they apply to everyone else. Past wins rewire your risk perception. You feel immune to downturns because you have never actually been taken out before. This is not arrogance, necessarily. It is just how the brain works. You have data that tells you betting big pays off, so you keep betting big, even when the situation has fundamentally changed. Now layer in what is actually happening in the markets right now that we are in one of the most volatile investment environments in modern history. The AI build-out has created a speculation cycle unlike anything we have seen in decades. Companies are pouring hundreds of billions into infrastructure with no clear timeline for real returns. BlackRock literally flagged this publicly, calling out crowding and leverage as the key reasons for what they expect to be a very rocky ride for investors. And the retail side is even more dangerous. With commission-free trading, leveraged ETFs, and margin loans more accessible than ever, everyday investors are now playing in markets that used to be reserved for professional traders with risk management systems in place. Most of them have none of that infrastructure. What this means for you, if you just hit 7 figures, is this. The current environment is specifically designed to separate overconfident money from careful money. High volatility punishes leverage. Speculation cycles reward early movers and destroy late money. And in a fragmented global economy with interest rates that shifted the cost of risk dramatically, the strategies that worked in a zero-interest environment just do not work the same way anymore. If you are still running aggressive growth playbooks in this environment without serious downside protection, you are not investing. You are gambling with your net worth. Okay, so let us talk about the quiet killer. The one that does not show up as a bad investment. It shows up as a better apartment, a nicer car, business class flights, a restaurant habit that costs you $1,000 a month. Lifestyle creep. Here's how it works. You make more money. Your standard of living goes up. Former luxuries become your new baseline. And now those things are not optional. They are fixed costs. They are your floor. The problem is that your floor is now fragile. A bad quarter, a deal that falls through, a market correction that cuts your liquid assets in half, and suddenly your lifestyle is not something you can afford anymore. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank put it perfectly. He said the way wealth gets drained is not through catastrophic single decisions. It is through recurring daily expenses that feel small but compound silently. Private memberships, elite private schools for the kids, moving to a neighborhood where just the property taxes exceed your old business revenue, a personal assistant, an executive office, premium service infrastructure that keeps your new life running. Every one of those things is a monthly commitment that requires a certain income level just to maintain. And most people who hit their first million did not model out what that actually costs to sustain. The Millionaire Next Door studied this decades ago and found that most actual millionaires with durable wealth lived in houses worth far less than they could theoretically afford and drove cars that looked nothing like what you see on social media. Real wealth preservation almost always looks boring from the outside. Let us get into the psychology here, because this is where the real damage happens. There is a cognitive bias called the Midas touch illusion, and it hits first-generation wealth builders especially hard. After a few big wins, you genuinely start to believe that your judgment is just better than average, that your intuition about deals, about markets, about timing is just sharper than other people. Sometimes that is partially true. Successful people do develop real pattern recognition, but the Dunning-Kruger effect hits finance hard too. At the peak of perceived competence, you think you know more than you do, and that is exactly when over-leveraging happens. You put a disproportionate chunk of your liquid net worth into a single speculative bet because you did your research and you feel good about it. You take on margin or debt to amplify a position because the upside seems obvious. You hear about a private deal from someone in your network and you wire the money fast because opportunities do not wait. This is how seven-figure net worths get destroyed. Not through ignorance, through overconfidence built on a real track record. Then layer the social status game on top of that. When you have money for the first time, there is enormous psychological pressure to signal it. The watch, the car, the house, the lifestyle that communicates to your network and to yourself that you made it. What research consistently shows is that these status purchases almost always come at the cost of productive assets. You liquidate something that was compounding to buy something that depreciates. You trade future wealth for present perception. And the brutal truth is that most of the people you are trying to impress are either doing the same thing or are not paying as close attention as you think. So what do you actually do differently? The single biggest shift is moving from emotional decision-making to systematic decision-making. Wealthy people who maintain wealth across time do not rely on their gut for major financial decisions. They build rules in advance when they are thinking clearly, and then they make those rules hard to override in the moment when emotions are running hot. This looks like a set allocation percentage that can never go into a single investment regardless of how good it looks. A waiting period, maybe 30 to 60 days, before committing capital to any new opportunity. An automatic rebalancing schedule that does not require you to make a decision to sell when things are down. It looks boring. That is the point. Boring systems survive market cycles that exciting strategies do not. On the diversification side, the fragmented global economy we are operating in right now is not a reason to pull everything into familiar domestic assets. It is actually the argument for international tax-efficient structures that give you exposure to growth across multiple economic zones without the full volatility of any single one. And treat your personal finances the way a high-performance startup treats its operations. Quarterly audits, line by line. What are you spending? What is it generating? What can you cut without reducing actual quality of life versus just cutting status signals? Most people with money have never done this seriously. They know roughly what comes in and roughly what goes out, but they have never actually stress-tested the model under adverse conditions. The question to ask yourself is, if my income dropped by 40% tomorrow, what breaks first? Whatever that answer is, that is your most urgent risk. Let us redefine what success actually means here, because I think a lot of people are optimizing for the wrong thing. The goal is not the size of the win. The goal is the ability to maintain your standard of living without active labor. Permanently. That is a fundamentally different target than hitting a number. It is a question of what does your money do when you stop working. And for most people who hit their first million, the honest answer is not enough to replace their income without serious lifestyle reduction. $1 million at a 4% withdrawal rate generates $40,000 a year. That is not financial freedom for most people. It is a starting point, which means the job is not done at 7 figures. The job shifts. You are no longer building to hit a number. You are building a system that generates, compounds, and survives. One of the most underrated wealth preservation strategies is your environment. The people you spend time with shape your financial behavior more than almost any financial advisor ever will. If your peer group is defined by consumption, you will consume. If your peer group values compounding and capital preservation, those values become automatic. The old wealth families understood this. Old money does not talk about money loudly. It talks about structures, taxes, trusts, and time horizons. The orientation is generational, not quarterly. That is the final reframe. Stop optimizing for the dopamine hit of the next score. Start optimizing for the boring, compounding, decade-over-decade accumulation that actually produces generational security. The first million is the proof of concept. What you do with it from here is the real test. If this video hit different, share it with somebody who just came up on some money. It might be the most useful thing they hear this year. And subscribe to POTENSIA. We do not just talk about getting money. We talk about keeping it.